Good morning, folks. Thank you for joining us this morning as people are coming on board. I'm just taking a quick glance here. Yeah, it's, I can see Nick and other people. Okay, great. We see more people on the YouTube, which is becoming an interesting trend these days. People like to watch on YouTube, and that's fine.
Yeah, I must confess I've done the same.
That's no problem, because sometimes people feel either they don't identify themselves or whatever. So folks, good morning. Welcome, whether you are here overseas, as we are. I've already seen some people already lining up on the YouTube. Welcome. My name is BIZTEK Fancy. I'm the president and CEO at Business and Technology Professional Association of Canada. We are very fortunate. We do this series, the Fancy That series, where we have this conversation, and we always look forward to bringing the best of the best. And trust me, we have the best of the best. In the last few weeks that you've been listening to, we had people like Patrick Naum, Chris Anderson's been here. Today we're going with Sire Mathews. He's based in Europe. In fact, today you're in Sweden.
Yeah, and you can. The sun is here. Joined us this occasion.
That's right. That's and enjoy the sun, because winter is not too far away.
I only see it 4 months of the year, so
that's exactly right. Especially where you are. So welcome, sir. We people wonder. I have been talking about, and we'll touch a little bit of the fact that I went through a problem myself in the last Thursday, Friday, and had to deal with it. So what it tells you, it can happen to the best of us if you're not careful. Sire is an award-winning security person. He's done some phenomenal stuff and didn't get into this business yesterday. So he knows, and you will find very quickly exactly why. So I'll tell you more about his background later, because I think the subject requires so much of time and stuff that I would rather we go straight into it. But I will tell you this. He's a global authority and has done some phenomenal stuff. And then you're going to hear Tofi Saliba tomorrow, and you'll find the same thing there on AI. So welcome, Sire.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to. So here, let me start with this particular question. It will give you a lot of leeway to go. Okay. One of the problems today we find is that a lot of the people have gone into security business because it's fun. Oh, it's okay, you can make money, right? Maybe they got passion, maybe they don't, but they think it's a straightforward, simple issue, and it's not. Why don't you had a very interesting way of actually talking about how the security kind of can be challenging.
Well, thank you very much, Bashir. Firstly, I want to say I'm very happy to be here. The sessions that you've done before are super interesting, and I'm always learning something new, so I'm very excited to be here. Happy to talk about my views on security, and I think I really align with yourself and Nick, who was on a few weeks back, which is just thinking about security in what I would say a real way, right? And so, like, a lot of vendors and companies will just push fear, right? And just, you need to worry, 0 days, this, that, the grizzly bear's going to get you. And I'm just not into that, right? Fear immobilizes people, and you can't look to defend yourself or even set up robust systems if fear is overriding your logic, right? And so that doesn't mean that security is easy, right? And so you can't avoid just taking a very pragmatic approach. And I like to use this Rubik's Cube to sort of give an example. Full disclosure, I'm not going to solve it here, so I hope I don't disappoint anyone with that. But let's assume for a second that this point in the middle is something that you want to protect, right? It's your key asset. It could be anything. And so this is your sort of network perimeter, right? And so what people typically do is they might do an asset list, or essentially a snapshot in time. And so they think they understand how it looks. And so you say, okay, the white hosts, they're really secure. The red ones have known vulnerabilities. They might sit on their own VLAN or behind a firewall. These yellow ones, we're not sure. The blue ones are monitored by a 24/7 SOC, and so on and so forth. So great, you think you understand it. Well, the issue is that, your asset here in the middle, and then by the time you wake up tomorrow morning, there's a CVE release, right? And it's a 0 day. And by the time you get in and have your coffee in the morning, there's been a change request executed. In fact, there's been 2 change requests executed. Now there's a couple of new ports open on your firewall. And while all this is happening, someone sent an email to your support team and socially engineered them. They've got access to the network. And while all that's happening, someone's sitting outside and they're monitoring the radio spectrum of your communique. And so what you see, I hope quite literally, is that at any time, your security or the kind of overall snapshot of your organization changes. And so this is why I have a sort of real issue with people that, I don't have a real issue with people that buy the lies, but I have a real issue with people who peddle the lies, mainly vendors who say, buy our product and it will prevent 0 days, it will stop this and it will stop that. I'm not, there's a use for these things for sure, but it's just so much wider than they like to tell you, right? And so I've actually, if you wouldn't mind me going through a couple of slides I've got, can I share my?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you have to enable it. Do you mind?
Let me just make sure. I thought I had done that, but there we go. Okay, you should be. You're a co-host now.
Okay.
We have a question from Louis Rifkin, which I will give to you as soon as you got this file.
I've got, so talking of security, I've actually got security settings enabled, so I'm gonna have to quit Zoom. I'll be back in 2 seconds if you don't. the irony of this is I'm practicing what I preach, so I'll be back in two seconds.
Right. Louis Rifkin, I will make sure that your question is answered, which is being able to take any financial advantages out of the equation a possibility? A very good question, which is actually not a bad thing. It's a question of, if you start to believe you're going to get hacked anyway, how do you then make sure that if somebody gets in, they can't get invalid information or information that's productive for them to compromise and do things? So hang in there. There's Sire is back with his security settings changed. That's good.
Back.
Good. Perfect.
There you go. So I think you now need to enable me again. We'll get there in the end. But I mean, this actually highlights a great point, right? There's something known as the CIA triangle: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so, this highlights the point that, while I'm sort of aiming for confidentiality and integrity of my data, right, I'm not, the availability of my screen sharing just isn't there. So that, I think, it kind of highlights a good point in itself. Right. But can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can. Because
okay, thank you. So
you have to downgrade because the security to do that.
Yeah. So, okay, we're in this environment, right? It's a very dynamic environment. And so most people, when they look at organization security, everyone's looking for Wally. And I don't mean a stupid employee. I mean, Wally is somewhat of a primitive, right? It could be a vulnerability in your system. It could be your Achilles heel, could be an insider threat, could be a number of things. But the fact is, there are Wallies everywhere. And this is just a concept that we need to understand in order to have a good chance of defending ourselves against adversaries who just don't live in the confines of scoped testing. They don't live in the confines of your organizational policies. If they have to break a window, they will break a window. If they have to blackmail someone, they will blackmail someone. And so what I'd like to show is this snapshot here, right? So if you say, well, where do the security issues lie in this picture, right? And so you might look at it and say, maybe it's the network, right? That's powering the TVs, something, okay, so stick a firewall on it, right? Go buy one of these great products. And, that might help secure that. But the fact is, when I look at this environment, I see a lot of different things. The first one is people, right? And so we can leverage people to do our dirty deeds for us. And one example of that is an IMSI catcher. And so for those that don't know, an IMSI catcher is basically a rogue base station, a rogue telecoms base station that you can deploy rather cheaply these days. You know, it won't cost you more than a few $100. The attack of these costs is very low. And so if you deploy this, then you can downgrade people's connections, intercept, you know, you can start to attack the devices themselves. Now, if one of those, if let's say this is in a workplace, then these are all potential people that are going to help get your exploit to the next stage, right? What about when they connect to your enterprise network? What about when they back up their device? So this is a way in for sure. Now, another one could be a rogue access point. It works in a similar way. In fact, I've got one right here. And so, you know, the nature of devices are constantly spitting out, hey, are you my home Wi-Fi? And we inherently, these devices, we trust that they say, no, I'm not, no, I'm not. Well, this device will say, yes, I am, and will force the connection. And from there, again, you can do similar sort of stuff. You can attack the device. Essentially, you're utilizing these people to carry out the attacks for you. Then you've got protocol-specific elements of people like Bluetooth Low Energy, and we've seen a lot of that with the track and trace stuff, and then certain chips. But then you've got social engineering, right? And so I often say, like, you know, one of these vendors is going to sell you an expensive product to defend your company. Well, as an attacker, sometimes this and a hammerhead drill is the best tool, because if I walk into a building with a high-vis jacket, a toolbox, and a hammerhead drill, and I start drilling, how many people do you think are going to question, should that person be there? Right? Arguably none, because most people will expect the guy in the hoodie, the guy who's trying to not be seen, the person or the lady, you know, who's trying to not be seen, who's going to plug in a USB and do something nefarious. Well, you know, you're certainly not looking at the person, you know, banging and drilling on the wall. And then, of course, you've got the economic incentives. So we'll say, if all else fails, you can probably find someone who works at the organization that you can pay them $10,000 to plug in a USB, right? No problem. Like, without a doubt, you'll always find someone who's willing to do that. So that's the people. Now, if we look at what else might be there, you've got BMUs, building management units. Now, they're getting smarter and smarter. And when things get smarter, they get put online, right? And so these essentially modern building management units are like really advanced. They control many elements of the building. And as I say, they're connected to the internet. They have, you know, some of the ones I've seen are, you know, full sort of computer network systems of their own. As I say, essentially that's a network. So as an attacker, that's something I want to get on, right? Because it can allow me potentially to leverage other things, go other places, what we call laterally move. It could be a jump host, it could be a way into somewhere else. It could be used for terrorist activities. So if you, I won't actually touch on these points, so I don't want to give anyone ideas, but you can leverage some of these stuff, you know, in really bad ways. Then you've got PsyOps, so it's things, you know, if I'm in a really cold place or really hot place, if I control the building management unit, I can increase the temperature or decrease the temperature. Now, you might wonder, what use is that? Well, maybe that will force everyone to go home for the day. And so now I've got an empty facility and it's much easier to gain access to an attack. And then, of course, you've got sort of APT-style attacks where people might be looking to over-pressurize something, cause a physical explosion, sort of along the lines that we saw with Stuxnet. Okay, and as you see, we're building up all these points. They're really starting to layer up. There's lots of them there. Now we've got embedded devices, and actually the green dots represent that. But really, there would be a lot more than this. So a typical handheld device that you see in a store, that might have sort of two sort of processing chips on it, right? And those are essentially systems on a chip. So one particular handheld device essentially might have two operating systems running on that one device. Now, so this number can just grow exponentially, and these are everywhere. And this is, you know, more in the realm of cyber physical industrial security. But again, it's a CPU that's yours, that you control, you can do stuff with. You can potentially laterally move throughout the environment, depending on what sort of protocols are enabled on these embedded devices. You can install malware. Again, if it's a POS system, right? If I can backdoor the processing chip on that, well, you know, I can start to steal cash or withdraw funds or clone cards. You can gather info and covert operations. So, you know, most people are going to look at the the host OS, right? But how many people are actually looking at what's running on these embedded chips? I can tell you, not many, right? Typically, that sort of stuff's reserved for high-level government auditing and military audits. Then you've got sort of the radio frequency spectrum as well. So right up until now, we've only, well, apart from the mobile, we've dealt with stuff that's probably on a network or a physical device. Well, what about all the stuff you don't see, right? And so that might include physical attacks, taking control of cranes, you know, manipulating real-world objects. It might allow you to eavesdrop, so you can use sort of things like this. This is called a hack RF, and this enables you to sort of monitor the radio spectrum, and you can notice things that are sent, and you can essentially replay them. That's a replay attack. There are other forms of these types of attacks, but essentially there are a lot of people that believe if you're not going over the internet and you're sending it over the air, that must be secure, right? And so they think that by implementing a custom protocol, we'll just, you know, completely derail any attempt to hack them. That's just not true. An attacker will simply set up one of these devices, log the traffic, use something like Wireshark to analyze the traffic, and reverse engineer the proprietary protocol. It's easy to do. You can't rely on this stuff to remain secure. Control, right? Again, a lot of these types of systems that communicate over the air in sort of non-typical protocols will be used for more serious types of things. And you can look to deny service and again laterally move and access. Then of course you're open source intelligence, and I've sort of put this everywhere because this can apply to the people, it can apply to the embedded devices, and what I mean by that is looking up chipset or technology sort of data sheets from the manufacturer. It could include looking up employees, it could include looking up secret networks that are around, and so that would allow you to gain access to private networks that perhaps you wouldn't otherwise know about. Blackmail is a big thing. If I can do some osint and get some dirt on one of your employees, well, that's something I can leverage to get them to plug in a USB, right? Default credentials, the systems that you've installed, it is just easy to find these things. So you have to change them, and people just often don't. Leaked credentials, have you been found in any dumps? And the technology themselves. So a real advanced attacker will not attack a live environment. They'll find out what you have and they'll recreate that in their lab environment. They'll attack that, they'll fuzz that, they'll look for 0 days in that thing, and then they'll attack you when they've got an exploit that will work and not fail, and it will be silent, and it will get in and it will delete the access logs, and you just won't know about it. So you can't rely on the cyber kill chain, as they call it, right? You can't rely on the fact that someone's going to enumerate your environment. They just might not do that, right? And so really the point is there are wallies everywhere. And I don't mean to say this in a way that should scare anyone, right? But it's just a fact that we need to acknowledge and change the way we think about applying security to the organization. Start to think more about the business impact, more about the context of the asset, more about our threat model, and being realistic about it. What's most interesting is that everything we've described, with the exclusion of people, will typically have not just the things we've mentioned, but an array of things that might affect them, known vulnerabilities, right? But that's not just that. There's configuration issues. And I can't tell you how many times I've successfully gained entry to somewhere based on configuration, not based on an exploit, not based on a CVE. So if you run vulnerability scanners or you do this kind of stuff, you say we're not vulnerable. That's probably not true, right? You have to configure the stuff well enough. And there's a great talk from the former head of the NSA, and he said, what's the difference between us and you? Well, we just know your network better than you do, right? And so that's the key. 0 days, I think the market says it all. There's a lot of this stuff around for a lot of these types of stuff. And then of course you have social engineering, right? Which we'll touch on that, shortly. But this is easy. Hi, this is tech support. Can you, SIM swapping? Can you change my SIM? Can you reset my password? Can you do this? So again, when you look at this sort of like dynamically changing environment with all the moving parts, constantly, you must have that smarter approach. And just to finish off here, a lot of people sort of look at attacks as a singular thing. So I'm going to launch a piece of code, it's going to gain access, I'm going to plug in a USB. That's just not true for most of the more advanced stuff, right? And so what you actually have is you have a number of sort of primitives, and they're sort of like exploit Lego. And so one thing that you might believe is benign, like an information leak, right, will be the primitive needed to build on the next part that's used to gain access to the organization, right? And so I think this is a really misunderstood part of security, is that chained attacks can and will be used against you. And you know, as we say, chained attacks might include you know, this is a thesaurus. You know, Matt just wants to improve his vocabulary. Not true. Actually, within the book itself, we have a listening device. Now, you could say, you know, what importance does that have? But that listening device might get me the single primitive I need to get a foothold on a device on the perimeter of your network. You know, and I can move through that. You know, we can use tools such as, you know, rudimentary tools, lockpicks, and you know, other sort of access cloning stuff, and this will get you through the door. And so what attackers are always looking for, they're looking for that loose brick, right? And if I can wobble that brick and I can get that loose, that's the first piece I need, right? And so when you're looking at security and you're running vulnerability scanners, or you're doing stuff from a very abstract way, you just it's very difficult, even for people on the offensive side, it's very difficult to see these chains, right? Because they're essentially just primitives that seem to have no relation or correlation. But again, that's simply not true.
So that's actually very interesting. There are a few questions we'll come to in a bit. Well, you touched, and I'll go from the bottom up, as we just talked about. Listening devices. Why this becomes even more important. People are working from home more and more, right? So what Patrick talked about, bring your own office, right? It used to be bring your own device. Now we are talking about bring your own office. Here's the interesting thing. So I've got my computer and I'm working on that. Either the organization gave it to me, which they cannot afford to keep giving it, everybody and their brother, and I mean create the image and update and all that, because you're outside. Yeah. So now, what happens to the fact that I'm one of those guys who likes to listen to music, and so I got Alexa on saying play this and play that, and there are many devices like that. There could be security stuff too that I have installed in my home, but it's listening. I'm on Zoom call, so now that people are now using Zoom or whatever else, and you can encrypt the heck out of it, no problem. Yeah. What about those listening devices that are listening and the cameras that are in there? You may have put one for babysitter, right? Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's a huge issue, right? I mean, people say, you know, what do I have to worry about if I'm being recorded? And well, I mean, that's the question for yourself to answer, right? I mean, you'd be surprised if someone says, you know, if you're in a well-paid job, but you hate your boss, right? You hate the CEO. You know, you go home, you just finished a call with him, and you're saying some really terrible stuff, right? Like this stuff is going to get you fired for sure, right? And so you think you're not saying much, but that could be enough, and it has been in the past, would be enough to convince someone to do something for you, right? And so that's of course one of them. Another one might be people actually speaking passwords. That happens, right? You know, they're on the phone. Oh, this is what you need to enter. So, I mean, there's of course a number of ways. Now, most people would assume that an attacker might be sitting there actually listening, and you know, any sort of attacker worth their weight will actually use modern sort of machine learning and automated methods, right? And so I can set up a bunch of listeners that are listening to conversations, convert that from audio to text, and I can pay Amazon to analyze it for me and extract the keywords. And if someone says something I'm interested in, flag it up and send me a notification on my email, on my Slack. So, you know, there's a misconception as well that, you know, there are people sitting there listening, hacking in keys and doing stuff. You know, attackers are leveraging, you know, modern techniques, DevOps stuff and machine learning and artificial intelligence and automation to do this stuff, right? And it's actually becoming much easier, not much harder.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. We talked about how brute or low-tech attack can actually be very effective, right? And you're just showing it. We defend for high tax and all that and the other, which has also happened. But I think low-tech, they've realized that they're going to adapt. An example, we would send the credit card and debit card security to people. Then we would send the PIN mailer separately. So the PIN for that card, initially they would compromise and do the stuff, and they would get caught. They started working in the post office.
Yeah,
right here, right?
Yeah.
They would intercept the card, open there, become masters at it. They would have the equipment in the truck. They would open the envelope, copy the card, put it back in, and now wait for you to activate your PIN. So, but they would also see the PIN because a few days later the PIN mailer comes, and they keep it separately on order for security. They would pick it up and do exactly the same thing. You would not know any difference. The bank said, saying, you must activate the card from home. I don't care where you activate from. I'm just waiting for you to do it. And so my point was, if that is the thing, how does an organization protect, right?
Well, I think, firstly, I think it was a good initiative, right? Sending them separately. Someone's thinking along the right lines. But a key part of sending two things separately is the second thing has to be out of band, right? And what I mean by that is, if you're sending the first part via, via email, or even via post, well, then send the other via email, via post, or if you're sending an SMS, then send the other one, on a website that you log into. Like, you have to, and that's not saying that's completely that's not ironclad, right? But this is where it comes into thinking about security in a pragmatic way, right? Like raising the cost of the attack, right? Raising the complexity. So that a good example is sort of old school GSM stuff, right? You would, if you wanted to eavesdrop on a GSM communication, you would have to get sort of like 4 or 5 old sort of Nokia phones, run your own program on it, all 5, because they would sort of channel hop. You'd have to pick up the pieces, reassemble the pieces. And so it can be done, but it's just not easy, right? It's not your average person that's going to do that. And so that's going to be reserved for nation states or security researchers.
Right.
Truthfully, there just aren't that many tech-enabled criminals that are doing that stuff, because you've sufficiently raised the bar in terms of complexity and cost to carry out that attack. And that's just what you need to focus on doing. Right. Let's take a good example of this is like secure facilities, military facilities, right? They're not built so you can't gain access. If you blew up a door, if you rammed it with a digger, you'll get in, right? But there's so many layers that are designed that the first one you get through in 10 minutes, you clone an access card, right? The last one, still sort of blast doors, you're not getting through for a long time, right? And so they bought themselves enough time to respond to it. And so that's key, is you don't have to be unhackable. You just have to buy yourself some time, limit the damage someone can do in your environment, and generally try and be sensible about it.
Yeah, you just exemplified something I've been saying for a long time, which is there is no silver bullet for security. It's multiple layers, and that's what you just discussed.
Defense in depth.
Defense in depth, absolutely. So here's the thing: what we discussed last week, and we've touched this thing with Tofi briefly, is that we know that people infiltrate networks and stay in there for 300 odd days and whatever, and they're doing it because they want to learn your behavior pattern, as you quite rightly point out. So using artificial intelligence right now will make it that much easier. How do you see the threats going forward, both virtually and of course even physically? And it's interesting, Guy had the same question here.
So I mean, I'm sort of trying to, my own company specializes in the cyber physical side of stuff, right? And so you know, I personally believe that the opportunities are just going to be more ubiquitous for attacks, right? And a good example of that is, you know, if you wanted to gain access to data on a ship or a yacht, right? Like way back, you would have to, you know, fly overhead in a chopper, right? And have some kind of listening equipment, and you know, you might even have to physically get on the boat yourself, right? Whereas now, there's a lot of commercial VSAT systems. There's a lot of smart stuff. You know, your vulnerable toaster on your yacht is now connected to your VSAT system that has an IPv4 address. So thank you very much for putting your yacht online, right? You just made it a lot easier. And this trend continues, right? You know, we have this uptick in smart cities, smart technology. And don't get me wrong, I love it, right? But no one's really pausing to think, what are the implications, right? And one of them will be the lateral movement. If I compromise that smart thing, right? Let's assume for a second it's got a chip that allows for certain types of RF communication, right? And so now, if we go back to the building Lego blocks, the primitives, I've got a host I control. I've got a chip, an oscillating chip on the device that I can send signals out from. I know enough to write some code to start sending a specific type of signal. So now I could use this pretty benign thing to attack something serious in the city. And perhaps if it's something like LoRaWAN, you know, I can attack something 10 kilometers away, right? And so again, this is just stuff that people aren't thinking about at all, really, generally speaking.
That's worrisome, actually.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, personally, I see it like this, is that we went through, you know, security was really bad, but no one was doing any like buffer checks, right? There's a lot of sort of classic memory type of vulnerabilities, buffer overflows, you know, these types of things. And then we implemented sort of memory safe stuff and so on and so forth. It got a little bit better and people got used to it. They knew what they knew. And then maybe it started to decline. Sort of defense products got a lot better. And then we decided to just put everything online and put a chip in everything. And so, you know, now I think we're going backwards in a lot of ways.
I have a question about come to anonymous attendee. I think I know who it is. Should security oversight of connecting cables be included in the operating system as for, let's say, USB devices? What do you think?
Should you what?
Should security oversight of connecting cables be included in the operating system, like such as the USB devices?
Yeah, I mean, arguably, but again, it's difficult, right? If we talk about this complexity, it's, you know, a classic attack. This device, right, is a bash bunny, and it could be any USB, right? I can make my own sort of offensive HID, human input device, and so let's assume we've got what we want. Now, an attack. Everyone used to say, lock your Windows PC, lock your Windows PC, you know, window L. Okay, great advice, generally speaking. However, there's an issue with that. I can write a program that there's inherently, that used to be, I'm not sure it's still the same thing, but Windows 10 would essentially connect to the strongest NIC, network interface card, right? And so if I could write a program, and I did write a program, that would tell Windows 10 that this was a fiber Ethernet NIC, right? You know, the most ridiculous speed. And so what happens is Windows 10 will connect to that. And then a program I can run on here to actually start collecting the authentication hashes. So what was actually possible, and it probably still is, that I could plug this device into a locked Windows 10 PC, grab the user hashes and walk away, right? And so USB is a bit of a difficult one, right? I think there are some environments where you just shouldn't have them. You know, if you're talking about, you know, really secure environments, you shouldn't be using USB, you know, and if you do, you've really got to set up a system that can do a lot of things before it enters your sort of clean network. Otherwise, you know, maybe you want to not limit the use of USBs, you want to more like limit the type of executables that can be run. That's a smart thing. You want to limit. If your web, your graphic designer, are they ever going to run PowerShell commands? Arguably, no. So, why should they have those features?
But this is, you're back to artificial intelligence being used here for good and or bad, depending on how not only the whole setup is, right, but how you're using it. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, completely.
Because, whether it's you're using bots or whatever, you can cause a havoc in there. Doesn't all this, and we haven't even gone too far deep, but doesn't one of the things come right away as we talk about it, is that the skills required to deal with all this problem are at a premium. We don't have that, right?
Yeah.
Because the technology has moved very fast. So we got the skills problem, and we've got a culture problem of blinders, as you have quite right. You want to address that?
Yeah, for sure. I can speak from my own personal point of view and experience as well. I love the more advanced type of stuff. Right? There's two researchers that I think are great. Christopher Damas, he's really into researching instruction sets, x86, that kind of stuff, and low level. He's got this God mode. I think it's 30 instructions, and you drop into super admin privileges. Got people like Brandon Falk that do very advanced sort of emulator type fuzzing. It's really great. You find some 0-day type of stuff. I love this kind of thing, right? This is what I like the most. But when I look at an organization and we're talking about tech-enabled criminals, let's be honest, they're not going to put that level of effort in. They just don't love it as much as I do. They're not going to put in the time. As I said, they might pick up the drill, they might pick up a hammer. They will literally do whatever they need to do. And so I found more success in adversary simulation by actually rolling it back and thinking more simply, like literally put on your dumb criminal hat and say, if I was trying to get something from this organization, how would I do it? And so a good example of this is, certain laws in certain countries, a lot of laws are very strict with hacking stuff, right? And so if there's a server or a PC, I know where it is, I want it, I want the data that's on it. I can try and hack it for sure. But arguably what's smarter is to break in and steal it. That's breaking and entering, right? That's theft. Much lower sentence if they're caught, way more effective because I can do cold boot attacks, right? And I can forensically image that device. I can forensically analyze that device every day of the week. I would definitely get your stuff from it. And the whole time is you're looking for a bunch of thugs who stole some computers, right? But you're wrong, because it's the team that's going to launch a really advanced attack in 18 months, who took the first piece they needed to build that picture, to get those keys, to get that access, to be able to sit there for months and not be noticed.
And he could actually pass that information to guys sitting 300, 500 meters outside the building, so that even if you caught him, the data's already gone. Right?
Yeah, good point that you mentioned that, right? Because one technique that we used to do in adversary simulation was to use these modern types of things like LoRaWAN, right? It's that out of band. So when I was saying about go out of band and they can't intercept, it works the other way. So if you're in an environment that's monitored 24/7 by a SOC, you'd be crazy to try and get a reverse shell out of that network, right? They're going to see you every time, right? You're going to be caught. Now, they're not looking at the radio spectrum, right? They're arguably, there isn't a system in the SOC that's looking at LoRaWAN traffic, right? And so if I get past primitive 1, plugging the USB in, assuming that's okay, it usually is, right? So now I can exfiltrate data via my out-of-band link. You're not ever going to see it, And beyond never seeing it, you're not going to be able to investigate it. You're not going to be able to prove it. I'm pretty much going to get away with it for sure.
Right. No, that's very worrisome, and it is actually. So the culture of the organization is also playing a big role here. And one of the problems is that there was a very interesting report that very capable security people actually crossed floor to the wrong side, right? And so now they're still working in the same companies. It's not that they've quit the jobs, but they got payroll there, but the bad guys And here's my question. Hasn't that risk increased tremendously as people have lost jobs? They may be working from home, but part of the challenge here is that when you're very vulnerable, it's the best time for the bad guys to get hold of you because they will be able to get you, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, this is what's interesting about COVID, right? Is any company that has spent the last whatever X years, right? A lot of companies will have spent a lot of money on audits, on penetration tests, on shiny new kit, and perhaps they're really mature in their security operations, right? And that's good for them. COVID came along, and now everyone had to work at home. No one has been, well, not many people have been spending the last few years securing their employees' home networks. And so one of the things I often say to people is, when was the last time you updated your router firmware? You know, people often look very blankly at me. What do you mean, router firmware? Well, that single point that creates your home network that everyone connects to, when was the last time you updated the firmware on that device? Oh, there's firmware, we have to update it. Yes, you do, right? And so, you know, right there is just a huge problem. So, I mean, home networks is like, if you attack someone at home, I would say it's like 100% gonna work.
Right, because they don't even change the password on their Wi-Fi's and whatever.
Right.
It's still admin and password is still password for all of them. Or if they do a password, it's their dog's name or daughter's name or whatever, and they're already putting it on the Facebook anyway, all the pictures. So that
and it's a totally flat network.
It's a flat, correct, exactly. So that brings about another question in my head, that for the last X number of months, people were working from home. Whether you were in airports, whether you were in government buildings, whether you were in corporate offices, banks, whatever. Wasn't that a perfect time? The bad guys were thinking like this, that they have already visited those offices and actually planted certain things there?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And also, you know, what is happening at the present time that presents an opportunity, right? And so if we talk about one of these highly secure facilities, how might I gain access? Well, if I turn up in a hazmat suit, right, and I fake some government things, and it's all about just selling the story, right? And if I turn up, you've got to understand what people care about. People care about their safety and their health, rightly so, right? So if I turn up in a hazmat suit, you know, rent a van for the day, I go to all the effort, put a sticker on it, you know, government viral response team, and I'm like, you know, we've got a couple of radio links, they're cheap as well. The guy in the van's talking out of it, easy to do, right? It's just a bit of theatre. I run up, evacuate the building, we've got a bio incident, right? Lockdown, COVID, you know, you're all gonna die if you don't get out. Well, you know, give me the key, I need to gain access, we need to decontaminate the area, quick, create the urgency, you know, scare the people, go, quick, move, you know, you're gonna get in, right, for sure.
That's probably one of the easiest way, and I don't want to take it from you, but I'll tell you this. I can personally vouch to this because we had a meeting where I was hosting some heads of the banks and risk management, whatever. Anyway, in my hotel, there was a event with Bill Clinton and Japanese Prime Minister. Right? This is in California. And me and the other guy who was the head of security in the EU, we said, why don't we try that? Well, obviously, we're not invited. We're not supposed to be there. People don't know who we are. We were dressed very well. We ignored every single one there. And there were Secret Service and other people there. We kept talking to each other as if we belonged. And they were phone out and whatever, just exactly as we went through every single person.
Yeah.
Right the way inside. We were inside in that facility where, and of course, then we, at the end of the evening, we did call the people who were connected to FBI to say, well, we had done this, right?
Yeah, good.
And on the way out, in order to be able to prove, I refused to get out unless I got the Japanese doles that they were giving. I even got my dole.
Yeah, good.
So can you imagine? That system works. This is
for sure.
Social engineering or whatever. So
and there's really, I just want to say, a last sign of really effective get out of jail free card, right? And so you can often, like in a lot of countries, you can buy replica police badges, right? FBI badges, you can buy Carabinieri badges, like whatever you need, you can buy it, right? Someone's selling it. And it doesn't even have to be a good fake. It just has to, you know, kind of do it. And so sadly, the rise of terrorism has created another opportunity as well, right? And so if I get, if you get stopped by a security guard or someone says, what are you? You take them to the side, you've got your badge, you show them that I'm here on an undercover counter-terrorism operation. Look, I need you to be discreet. I need you to be quiet. On the 10th floor, we've got suspected terrorist cell. An attack is imminent. I need you to clear the building, walk out that way, and and whatever. You sell it to them, right? And so who's going to question that? And that's the kind of the problem. Like attackers or tech-enabled criminals or just criminals in general will just abuse trust, abuse people's preconceptions, right? The preconception that anyone with a badge working counter-terrorism is probably who they say that. Well, that's a big reach. But so I'm not for a second saying that everyone should start being cynical, right? But if someone said that to me, I'd show me some paperwork, right? You're not just going to flash a badge and get away with it.
Yeah, that's actually correct. We've seen it's interesting, guys talking about start cheap with janitorial staff who easily can be corrupted because they're low paid and enter the building.
You can even go further and get a job there.
Yeah, I have actually seen them take tapes out. I caught these people afterwards when we started to figure out what happened. It required many different combination of videotapes and all that, where they were dropping the magnetic tapes, which had the data of the bank, into the dirty water because it was protected the way it was sealed. And he's cleaning away. Nobody stopped him because he put the tape from behind it. So they are what guys talking about is actually a very powerful point here, is that it starts a slow but methodical attack because you can do it. And we are, that brings a question, that are we in a culture that we keep buying shiny tools? We don't know how to operate them. We don't know what our needs are. Like this, what you're talking about is a much broader, and the approach is defense in depth, right?
Yeah.
Are we not missing that by going and buying shiny tools and we think, oh, we got this covered?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had requests to pen test web apps that have, that don't have any users, right? It doesn't have any data apart from public data. So arguably, why are you testing that? I mean, if it's in your organization, on the network, fine. But this particular web app was on a public cloud server. Well, not public, but normal cloud system. And so you just don't need to pen test that, right? You just don't, because
right.
as long as your DevOps team have thought about their risk management and said, if this website goes down or is defaced, how can we get it up quick again? How can we restore it? That's all you need to do. You don't need to stick a firewall in front of it. But beyond that, you first of all, you have to say, what are we trying to protect, right? It starts, a good example is a manufacturer I've worked for before. Most people, if we had external security people come in and we said, what are we trying to protect? And they say the blueprints, the patents, and I would say, okay, that's a normal guess. Most people would say that. Whereas this particular organization owned the whole value chain, right? They owned the means to produce it. They owned the companies that would, I'm trying to say this stuff without giving away who it is.
No.
Would take the stuff and into the factory. They own the distribution. They own the stores, the e-commerce, retail. So if an attacker takes one of these blueprints, you can't reproduce it. You're never going to compete. You will literally go out of business. So who cares about that guy that was stupid enough to take the blueprints and try, right? But to this organization, the brand is everything. The fact that people can buy online and feel secure, that's everything. Because once that's gone, they're not generating revenue. So there's your business impact, right? And so you're protecting the payment system. You put a lot more effort into end-to-end security of your payment systems in store. Is your cabling secure? Can someone put a USB into a POS? Can someone attack a third-party vendor? Can someone now attack your PCI DSS environment? Can someone attack an administrator or a VPN to that environment? These are the questions you ask, right? Not should we buy that appliance?
Actually, I can add to that, and I won't name the airport. I was asked to do the review, and they'd done all sorts of things right. Guess where the problem was? When the terminal spoils for one of the staff, check-in agent, the airline is checking flights in, they don't have time to fiddle around. Their terminal has to be replaced. they were replacing the bad terminals that had been tampered with already without realizing, because somebody got corrupted in the store where all the computers were kept, or the terminals. And it was mind-boggling how that was happening. And they had overlooked, and everybody had signed off. And so I don't take that approach. Anyway, I found the problem, and I thought to myself, no amount of tools would have saved you. Here's another question for you. And I now bring it to personal, because my mistake on Thursday, as I mentioned, that I became a victim on phishing from this Nigerian. And I knew that. The worst part is that I had 90, 100 emails over the last 12 months from the same very people. But here's the question. When I took control of my LinkedIn account and I changed the password, my IP address being right here in Toronto, the Nigerian gang was changing the password back using that phony email address that they had, with a completely different IP address in Nigeria. Here's the interesting question. This went on about 7-8 times, where I would change 10 minutes later, I would find they've changed again. I would change it back because they'd stuck their phony email in the middle. When I realized that, I went deeper and I said, oh my God, that's what they're doing. Why would that not have sent an alert at LinkedIn to say, we've got a problem here. This legitimate guy is in Toronto, and IP address is coming and changing it is actually from Nigeria.
Yeah.
And there was no alerts of any stuff. They should have shut the account down and saying, no, block it. We've got a problem here, right?
No, absolutely, yeah.
But they didn't do that, right? Which is interesting. And here we think, oh no, these guys, all of them have fantastic security. So doesn't this equation come to, if you don't protect yourself, nobody else is?
But I mean, exactly right, because I think it all comes down to economic incentives. And what economic incentive does LinkedIn truly have to protect your single account? Because most likely, right, they can restore that. Facebook and these kind of things, they can restore your account to good standing. But it's still a great point, because arguably, well, not arguably, it just isn't that difficult to implement those types of checks. And an interesting point, something sort of I was involved in some research where people were spoofing calls and text messages, right? And they were saying, oh, it's the attackers are to blame. Well, of course, quite literally, right? But in a greater sense, I blame those companies that blindly send a message that clearly isn't from the number. You can specify who it's to, but the way you've sent it isn't who it's to. They haven't verified that. So but again, there's no economic incentive. In fact, the economic incentive is the other way around, right? They want more people sending messages. They want more people doing this stuff. And I hate to say it, but it's true. There's a lot of companies that know their things are being used for nefarious reasons, but it's generating too much money to shut it down, so they won't. And so they'll claim they're doing stuff about it. They claim they kind of know about it, but it's difficult, but it's not. Right, and the fact is they're making money off it, so it's not going to stop.
It's about profitability rather than doing the right thing, basically, right?
Sadly, yeah. I mean,
very sadly.
In cyber physical situations, I heard people just dismiss the loss of life, right? Like you just hire someone else. Whereas when you talk about losing, revenue, then it matters. But I mean, it's not incentivized for the right reasons.
So this brings up another very powerful area. Given that we have gone through COVID-19, people working from home, in fact, I heard now 25% increase in e-commerce and so forth, because people are now buying things from home rather than physically going out there. So a lot of things have changed. There was no playbook for working from home in the manner we are now doing with the networks and all that, bring you on. Isn't there a desperate need for training, upgrading of skills? And there are two parts to this. One is the part we should do right now to make sure that we don't become more vulnerable, which we already are. A, and B, a serious thought to saying, get back into the schools at the lower level, right? And start teaching these kids that it's too good to be true. It is. You don't do that. Nothing is for free. Whatever in training, how they should operate. What do you think about that?
I mean, I completely agree. Right, security awareness is hugely important. Right, and I take any opportunity I can to educate people on particular risks. But it's sort of a lost effort if it's not combined with other things. If it's not combined with a political effort to change the laws, harsher penalties, or both for the attacker and the company that failed to secure this data, right? We see that GDPR and so on and so forth, and HIPAA and fines under that, which is great. But also the people that actually make the product. So again, going back to your home router, I mean, why by default most of them just don't auto-update? It's kind of crazy, right? In addition, most routers that you get from your ISP, internet service provider, they're going to be pretty bad routers, right? And most of them, you can't even configure basic deny rules, right? What if you want to deny an IP address? Well, on most of these home, routers the ISP gives you, you just can't do that. So, but again, they're not economically incentivized to give you a better router, which would offer more protection. And as we've said, it's not foolproof, right? But if you've got a router that you can't even set up a block list or an allow list, then you're fighting a losing battle, really, because you're sitting there totally exposed, things not updating itself. I mean, look at Mirai botnet. That leveraged that exact thing, right? Just, that's how it grew so big.
Yeah, that's actually, so there's two parts to the approach here. One of the things which would be interesting, and the reason I bring it up is, it happened to me 2-3 days ago. The question now, and our approach, should it not be that you assume that you're going to get hacked? That you assume that you're going to get hacked. Now, what can I do to prevent them from taking valuable data and monetizing it? Which means you break up the data, how it's stored, encrypted. There are different approaches that can and should be taken there, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Sort of I mentioned earlier, sort of raising the cost in terms of complexity and actual cost, right? And what I mean by that, well, like when you gained, so how an attack will work is like once you've gained access to a particular user, it might be, Bashir at your PC. Well, you want to become administrator ideally. Now, a lot of people will browse the web as an administrator, right? The default account. So there you go, no effort required. But and so what you're doing is you're browsing the web, you're doing your banking, you're sending your emails, and so if you're going to do that, it's very cavalier, and you really would have to be like a hawk, right? If someone sent you a password via your email, you better scrub it, forensically delete it, right? So you could go through all this hassle, or you could quite simply utilize a really effective technique of compartmentalization. So arguably, I sort of, I would advocate, and I do, very much split up the uses, right? Software developer profile on your PC, right? I don't want my software development profile on my PC connecting to Zoom, right? I don't want my software development user checking the email, right? It's great as well. You don't get distracted when you're trying to be productive, but so there's hidden benefits. But the point is as well, like when you're doing your banking, you should only be doing your banking and your finances. So all of the finances can sit within there, but they should sit there. And if you want to check and I would put other things like emails and instant chat in the same area, and you've got your web browser. And so you can do this at the system level, create different accounts and move between them. That can be quite obstructive to a workflow, but you can start to utilize virtual machines, right? And so with full disk encryption, that you maybe have something like a YubiKey to access that disk, right? And to decrypt it, and that YubiKey sits in your drawer, right? And so you've raised the complexity. If I want to gain access to you, I either have to be there at the right time, or I need to get the key from your drawer. And in addition, if I gain access to one particular user that's got low privileges, I have to figure out a way to get there. Now, you bought yourself some time, because now you've got the opportunity to spot someone moving between accounts. And how, you're probably asking, how might one do this? There's a great company out there that produced something called canary tokens, right? And so you can make a canary token that takes many forms, from a database file to a text file. It can actually be even a web server address or a DNS entry. Look it up, canary tokens. You can get many different types. And if you put those throughout your compartmentalized systems, they're essentially tripwires, right? They'll tell you when a certain part of your system has been accessed or compromised, again, buying you more time, right? Shutting down that virtual machine, isolating it, not logging onto that user again, or changing your passwords. And this, to my mind, is the most and probably only truly effective way to secure your own setup. You know, just, I think the main point is just don't give them an easy ride. Like, make it really, really, really hard for them. That's what you're best off doing, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's like defense in depth. You do create as many obstacles, and you're right. There are so many easy targets available. I used to always joke about it, but it's no joke that in security, you just don't want to be the first up there, but you don't want to be last, or you don't want to be last 5. And because there are so many easy targets that people can go to. One of the problems also is we do not use risk management in security, and that's causing a big problem, because people come up and say, I got to do all these things, and then the guys are not listing in the corner suite because of the finances. When there are some challenges in security, will do no problem, right? Depending on the, especially if the data is classified, but even infrastructure is classified and so forth. And data classification. Right? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The risk management or the threat modeling thing, I mean, it's super effective.
Yeah.
If you understand the threats, right? If you can understand your threat model, and what I mean by that is, like, if you're not sort of thinking simply like an attacker, thinking of all those different things they can utilize, the truth is you're just not going to be able to manage risk, because you can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't measure what you can't gather, right? And so by that very line of thought, if you're not gathering the right information, and that might just mean profiling your attacker or type of threat. And so a good example of that was a company I was advising, and they said, yeah, we're going to encrypt everything. You know, that's the way to go. Databases, literally everything. I said, oh, okay, what are you going to do with the keys? We're going to put them on a key storage server. I was like, okay. Now everything that's on that server, there are many different parts of it. It's got to have no vulnerabilities, no configuration issues. It can't be accessible, via some service that makes it vulnerable. But if it was, and an attacker gains access to that, or even if just one of your database administrators screws it up, and corrupts your data storage, now you've essentially ransomed yourself. And so when you're talking about risk management, again, it's just very complex, because, you can default to encrypt everything, but, like, where's that key? Back to the example of me breaking in and grabbing a server, I'm going for the key server, Bashir.
Yeah,
right? Of course I am. And you're not going to get it back unless you pay me 10 million.
And we're not very good at key management, you know that, right? So
well, there's that too, right?
That's
not many
not
people
a problem.
do that.
That's true. Sometimes it's simple. There's 2 questions here, because we're running out of lecture around of time, but it's okay. We can go 5 so minutes over. The one is the responsibility of the service providers, right? Should they not be held accountable to a higher standard to do certain things?
Yeah, but I think the opportunity to do this is in the procurement process, right? So like companies that I've advised and worked with, I've actually been part of the team in a procurement, and I say, hey, unless you show me a valid pen test report of your systems, unless you show me this, and this, InfoSec governance doc, you're just not going to pass that initial stage, right? And if they say they do, hold them to account, contractually as well. So every company has that opportunity in the procurement process, even for the giants, right? Like, if you're bringing a decent amount of business, you can, like, bend Microsoft over to sign some terms that are favorable to you and offset your risk, right? And put it back on them, rightly so. And so if you miss that opportunity, all the sort of shouting and screaming or lobbying will just not help, right? Because they're not economically incentivized. They've already got your contract. What can you do?
That's true. The last part, I think this answer for this is going to be much longer, so we can do it with no question. We have to do session 2 and 3, because there's a lot of stuff here. But the question was, if you wind the clock back are we potentially looking at this using a dumb terminal approach?
A dumb terminal?
Dumb terminal approach, which means the device at the end, it's all stored inside, right? At the mainframe or whatever. But people access the data, they see it, but when you're doing things, you're doing it in the mainframe, which means all the corporate world problems that silos that create duplication of data all over the place, which is a major problem because how do you protect that? Yeah. And so in here, if we were to take that approach of centralized data using blockchain so that you only get to see what you need to see. So the record's not floating all over the world to start with. And it's like almost Chrome using the Chromebook, right? There's nothing there. It's like an API. You go in there. What do you think about that approach?
I mean, that's the approaches like that. Again, it's very difficult to give like generic advice because I will say like any particular advice starts with a good operational security audit where you understand the needs, you understand the network and the intricacies. I think my personal sort of interest at the moment is in deploying these types of systems is more about zero trust architectures, right? And so that might include things like this, but more importantly, it just and we can actually have another session where we go into depth on zero trust because as I say, it's something I'm sort of really developing it at the moment. But I think there is a place for these types of stuff, but these more sort of modern systems and ways to do it seem to be better to my mind because the issue, like you mentioned, mainframe, right? And so like let's take one of these sort of classic mainframes. Like a lot of people don't realize that you can break out of I'm not going to mention their name, the big boys OS. You can break out of that into a Unix operating system, right? It's underneath it, right? And so so a lot of people are like, we need to monitor our mainframe commands, right? We need to monitor. Well, is anyone checking that someone isn't just having the time of their life on a massive mainframe running as an administrator of the underlying Unix system? So I would argue to a degree as well, like when you move away from like non-standard technologies, you're just going to have a smaller pool of specialists, which potentially might introduce a bigger issue that you just don't see the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. There is no one particular solution. It's a combination of, and it depends on your needs, what type of business you are, what type of data. Is also the fact that we carry everything that's possible we can get out of people and the likes of Facebook monetize. But this impacts also privacy because you can't have privacy without security and security without privacy. And they structurally operate very differently in different places. That's the problem. But I think what we can do, these questions, there are plenty here on the list here, but we can do a part 2, right? Because I like the zero trust and even the fact some of the challenges, like we talked about security, or you talk about security issues are dynamic, they changed. So it's not easy, it's complex. You can't go with this with the mindset and blinkers. You need to understand the set of challenges in front of you before you do anything. The network, how you protect that, how we go about looking even the insider threat, the weakest link, the guy who's paid the lowest amount of money, training listening devices. There's so much you covered here in terms of the operating system and all that. I think it's fantastic. I think people will have to listen to this a couple of times to get, oh my God, because there's so much fact in this hour.
Well, I'm happy, and I would just say one thing, and people are asking like what might be the more secure thing. One thing I would just tell everyone to do for sure, like this is totally generic, is you've got to have some kind of network security monitoring system set up, right? You've got to have a security operations center. If you outsource it, fine, right? But the fact is you need that hybrid approach. I would say like you use automated tools, right? Like IDS stuff and like network security monitoring tools to like flag, not even known, what it thinks is known bad, right? And that's going to include a bunch of false positives. But then you rely on your sort of tiered hierarchy of specialists to triage that. And so like, if you're not taking this hybrid approach, you're just going to miss it, because I'm not going to name names of vendors, but there are a lot of things out there. In fact, I will name one, because it's an example. Benjamin Delphi, he created a tool called Mimikatz, right? And that's a pain for everyone. It extracts administrator passwords and everything, and memory dumps, and it's a super effective tool, right? There was a company called Carbon Black who came out and said, we stopped Mimikatz dead, right? And people saw that, and there was word of, so Benjamin like created a modification to Mimikatz and demonstrated it, and actually Mimikatz was able to stop Carbon Black, right? And so it's like, well, actually, you know, Mimikatz stops Carbon Black. And so it's like, you know, under those sort of shiny toys, that's just one particular thing. If you're not, I would actually, my approach to securing network would be know your network really well, like super well, like read every manual you can, right? For sure. Like step one. Step two, you know, configure it well. Configure it as they say in the manual, like utilize things. Notice PHP. People say it's a really dangerous language. Well, you can actually disable dangerous functions. So go ahead and do that. And thirdly, start monitoring it all, right? Because arguably, I don't like to add God mode to an environment, because it's just one more thing to worry about, right? Good compartmentalization, VLANs, encrypt stuff, monitor stuff, set it up well, configure it well, keep checking it, keep reviewing it, audit it, understand it, know it better than the attacker, and you're off to a good start.
And your point there is be very dynamic, which means you're staying on top every day, every minute, right? So this
because security isn't a point in time. You'll never get to a point and wave a flag and go, we did it, guys, let's crack a beer and order a pizza, right? You know, it's something you do day in and day out, and you never stop. The day you stop is when the doors of your business close.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I think it's fantastic. What we'll do, I will reach back to you very quickly in a few minutes. We can do part 2 and part 3 as required, and hopefully we'll take forward what we talked about, is get a group of people and talk about the best practices, right?
Great.
So I will do that very soon, in fact. So I'll chat with you in a bit. But this is fantastic. Thank you very much, Sire.
Thanks for having me, Bashir.
My pleasure.
We'll look at if we missed any questions and take them in the next session.
Yeah, there are a few. There are a few that.
Okay, brilliant. Look forward to it.
Thank you, and Louis, thank you very much. Mr. Rifkin is saying he really enjoyed, and Guy, as he just left, he said he loved the Rubik's Cube example. It was actually pretty good because it illustrates a very important point there. So that was a good innovation on that by itself. So
thanks,
thanks very much. Enjoy the little bit of sunshine. I'll get back to you very shortly.
I will. Take care.
And thank you, folks, for attending. Really appreciate, and we will have the video on our website and on the LinkedIn very quickly. So thanks again, and thank you for the questions. The fact that you were engaged helps. All the very best. Thank you, sir. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
All the best. Cheers. Bye-bye.